Hello and welcome to the Scuttlebutt, your destination for learning to think deeper, make better decisions, and earn more money as someone who has served in the military. I'm your host, Brock Briggs. I was in the Navy from 2014 to 2018. And when I got out, I had no idea what I wanted to do. This show is the answer to what I needed, an open-ended exploration of careers, resources, and ways to lead a more effective life by talking to some of the world's most interesting vets. Today, that veteran is Mark Delaney. Mark is a former Army officer and is hyper-focused on veteran transition. He hosts the Veteran Semi-Professional Podcast, which recently crossed over 100,000 downloads. He's also building Vet Journey, a SaaS tool that will track vets' transition process and assist in their transition outside the service starting from a year out. Mark has had a ton of experience in veteran hiring, and much of our conversation hinges around the barriers inherent there and the way he's trying to use that experience to tackle those huge problems. If you're looking to get more of this type of content, you can visit scuttlebuttpodcast.co to get a weekly newsletter diving deeper into the topics discussed on this show, as well as transcripts and soon, video. Please enjoy this conversation with Mark Delaney. You were just saying that you're a sucker for an origin story. Why is there a particular reason that you're a sucker for origin stories, or just like the hero's journey of like the come up?
Yeah, I always like to know where people get started. I like in reading, like I'm a big reader, and so like whenever I'm reading books, like one of the first things I always do is like go to the dust jacket and like read the author's bio, or like anytime there's some type of nonfiction that I'm reading, at some point there'll be something in there about how this person got started. I always dig that, and maybe it's just like the human to human interaction with me, the background of where you came from and then where you are now and everything. And then I think part of that too is I definitely have like an entrepreneur's mind of like I'm always looking for businesses to think of or something, and it's always just kind of fun to me of like when I'm talking to entrepreneurs about how they started their business, of like how did this get started, right? It didn't just appear out of nowhere. It was you and some friends sitting around think of an idea, or you're out traveling and a problem presents itself and you're like, man, this widget or this service would be really useful right now. And I always just enjoy like people identifying this kind of like inefficiencies and then like wanting to do something about it. That's like something I very much recognize with.
We're definitely going to talk a ton about startups, and like, because I think I also we see eye to eye on that line of thinking. I have found myself also very interested in origin stories, and I think for me a lot of what it comes back to is I'm always looking for how people started and like what did you do in that first step. And it's kind of like,
Yeah.
I don't know, it's kind of like startup porn a little bit, because it's like, how can I do that? And then it's kind of like an encouragement to you to be like, oh yeah, like it kind of like fuels the fire. It's a dangerous one. I definitely have found myself like overindulging in this, like, rather than just focusing on doing, you're just like listening, like thinking that you'll get more information. But I agree with you. I think that knowing the starting point of where people are coming from helps set the stage. So,
and sorry, hold on. I want to go down like one more little tangent here of thinking about like especially from like an entrepreneurial perspective. I think there's something in, founding a new company or new idea when like you take that first step, and it's like that very first small step of like, you're not actually like, building a product or a service yet. Like you're just going to talk to a potential customer, but like you're starting to go down this like other path. Like you're breaking off of like the normal go get a regular job, just work there for the rest of your life kind of path. And I'll be clear, like I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but it's like diverging from the norm that I kind of like when you start stepping away from the easy path of what's laid in front of you And there's something in that I like hearing in entrepreneurs when they're like, oh man, there's something here. I got to start making like that first step to get into something. And I always like try and tease that out when I'm interviewing people on my show, because I want to show other people how to just get that first step going. Even if they're not necessarily thinking about a startup or, creating a new venture, even if it's just, I want to go, pivot into a new career field or leave the military or apply to this school, whatever it is, but just showing people like whatever your big crazy vision for like success in your life is, like it has to start with a step somewhere. And like I want to show people like what that step looked like for other people so they can get a sense of how to do that step for themselves.
I think at a certain point, because I've experienced what you're talking about, that there's like almost a specific moment in a day almost where you chose to do something differently. And I think earlier on, I used to believe that everybody maybe needed to be an entrepreneur, and maybe that was just kind of like my foolish, like I was interviewing somebody yesterday and just talking about how I've changed my mind on almost everything I believe in since starting this podcast. That's something that I have changed my mind on. But what I think it's actually reminiscent of, or like an indication of, is that you're choosing to pursue your higher calling, whatever
Right.
that is. And it's not about, some people, their higher calling is that just kind of like traditional job, but like and that's okay. Like you said, there's nothing wrong with that, but there's a mindset shift that needs to happen. And like being the ultimate you, or I don't know what the words are, but it's like you can either just float through life or you can like go this other way. And
Right.
that's what it's referring to.
Or like even in like the kind of traditional career field mindset here or something, if you really want to go get that real big job or something, at some point, like you kind of have to go outside the norm a little bit. Like you've got to reach out to that director who's 10 pay grades above you and say, can I get 15 minutes of your time to talk to you about this position? Because I'd eventually like to be you. Right. If you just kind of follow like the script, if you follow the normal script, you're going to get normal answers. And so I was like trying to dig into people of like how they went past the script to achieve, things like to create their vision for life of whatever it is.
What was that moment or that day and time when you had chosen to do that? And I kind of want to like step back here. It's like you did ROTC in college and kind of like that led to your 8 years in the Army. Did that mental shift happen before you joined? Like, were you I was slinging lemonade, just the classic like early entrepreneur story, or did that come later?
I was definitely slinging lemonade and mowing lawns and scooping up snow as a kid for sure. And that was mostly just a way of, I got like a very, very small allowance, like, like $5 a week or something like that from my parents. And that wasn't enough to, cover going to the movies and buying all the candy that I wanted, or, buying paintball when I was in high school. That was kind of my thing. And so I was like, okay, well, I need some extra money to do something. So, I used to roll around with like a pretty fat stack of cash as like a 12-year-old, just because I was mowing lawns all the time. And it was just like, I just wanted like that little bit of extra. And then for me personally, my kind of like entrepreneurial mind like paused while I was in the military. And there's the reason I did it for like me personally, like there were definitely like business ideas that popped in my head, or like, oh, I could go do XYZ or something. My thought for me, like while I was in uniform, was that, I was 100% focused on the military as a profession. And I was concerned that if I started, trying to build a business or something, that I would personally lose focus on that. And like I would end up like not being as effective of a leader in the military. And like I know people who've been able to do it, and like they're still, able to serve effectively, serve not just effectively, but well. And they have a side hustle or a small business they're working on or something. It just, for me personally, that wasn't the path that I wanted to go down. And then, when I was leaving the military, and I was looking at, what I wanted to do, there's definitely a part of me that just, when everyone says go left, I'm just immediately like, I'm just going to go right. Right. I've probably pissed off plenty of, ex-girlfriends along the way who are just mad because they want me to do something. And then I just like, no, I don't want to do that. Like, as soon as you tell me to do it, I just don't want to do it. Like, that's just my mindset. And, if any of my ex-commanders are listening to this right now too, they're probably also agreeing like, God damn it, Delaney, like I just wanted you to do this and you just didn't want to do it. So I definitely just have that like ingrained in me a little bit. Like I just kind of want to break the norm and do something else. And then, when I was leaving the Army, I was just super frustrated with the transition process. It was just, it was agonizing to me. And I was like, this system is inefficient. And it was frustrating to me because I was seeing, all this stuff out there in the world about companies that want to hire veterans, and like veterans are great in the workplace and provide value. And there's all kinds of, great stories of veteran entrepreneurs and everything out there. And it just felt like this whole system was just designed to just push us into a check the block kind of job thing. And I was like, I just feel like we have, this massive amount of talent potential in the military, and the current system is not doing a great job of capturing it and putting it back into the United States, whether that be for, going into corporate America, going, if you're leaving active duty, going to serve in the reserves somewhere, going to work on whatever it may be. I know there's great talent in the military, and the current system is just not designed well enough to be able to successfully transition those people and like really capture the potential of 100% of those folks, so we can get the most value out of you as an individual that you can return back to our country once you leave the uniform and once you're serving, outside of the military.
One of the podcasts that's in my ongoing rotation is called The Shit You Don't Learn in School by Steph Smith and Calvin Rosser. And one of the episodes that they had recently, they were talking about how to be a magnet as like a company or an individual. And they referenced a couple companies that recently the CEO, or not the CEO, but the founder of Anduril, the defense like tech company.
Yeah.
They talked about one of the perks that they have as a company is they actually allow and pay for tools for their employees to like build their side projects. Like they're encouraging their employees to do things outside of work that make them happy, and they're happy to fund that. They're like giving them the check to do it. One of the things that the military certainly struggles to do is it doesn't foster that at all. Like if you have an idea about how things ought to be better, the amount of red tape is it's tremendous. Like it's not designed to change to what's better. And I've said this on many episodes before, I don't know why, but I have never felt less creative in my entire life than just like making it through my enlistment. And maybe that was just lack of time, lack of energy. Maybe it was my age, like all of those things. I don't know, but it literally felt like there was a light switch of creativity that flipped when I got out.
I'm having this like flashback to this moment. I was a brand new second lieutenant, and I went to this. So it wasn't a training course. It was actually a study being done by a unit which has now been closed down called Asymmetric Warfare Group. And so what they were doing was they were trying to gather data and assess the viability of training marksmanship with live rounds versus simulated rounds. Okay. Or like computer simulation. All right. So essentially what happened was like my battalion got selected to do this, and a group of us got sent up, and we spent, so like the first day was like baseline day. All right. So you would do like a qualification course and some basic shooting. And then, my group went and we spent 3 days doing like hands-on training with like former tier 1 operators. And it was awesome. Especially, I was like a couple months in as a brand new LT. It was fantastic. And I've never been a good shot. I'll be the first to admit that. Okay. But to kind of give you an idea, at the end of like 3 days of instruction, I remember sitting Indian style, which is not necessarily like the best shooting platform, in full kit. And I was just like dropping targets at 400 meters. Like it was nothing. All right. And like, that was crazy. Okay. So anyway, and then like, while our group is doing this, there's another group out there doing computerized training. All right. And so basically then like, they bring the data back and they're trying to assess, the basic intuition is that, you shoot live rounds, you're going to be a better shot, but is it maybe, can we get like good enough with the computer simulations where we can kind of offset, the cost and the time of going to a range or something? Anyway, I'm not going to go down like the full rabbit hole of like the study, because that's not the point here. So I took some of these techniques back to my unit, and I took my company to the range and employed what we did there. And it was very, very basic stuff. This was not any like crazy wazoo stuff. I mean, really all we did was we zeroed out to 100 meters, and then we were grouping at 300 meters. Like that's all we did. This was like basic fundamentals of marksmanship. The next time we went to a qualification range, I captured all the data, and I showed that, after my training got entered into the system, we improved our marksmanship as a company by 15%. Like that's pretty significant. And I remember taking that to
forgive me, like how many people are in a company? Like 120. Oh, okay. So that's a big number then for that many people.
That's pretty significant. I mean, like a 15%, and this is from one session. All right. Like we'd had a qualification course prior to this, like a basic qualification, marksmanship. And then, I got buy-off from my commander to do this kind of one-off training thing. And then the next time we went to a range, and I'll also say during that one-off training thing, we didn't even have the full company there. It was maybe only like 75% of the company. But then the next time we went qualified, scores went up 15% across the company. Right. So then, I go back to my commander and I show this data and they're like, oh, that's cool. That's not really how we do things though. Like there's like an order on how we train marksmanship. And part of this is like a failure on myself. Like I was still kind of too young and dumb to be able to understand like how to sell this to my boss. But it was like, I have clear evidence showing that I know this training strategy is like a little bit different than like what the FM says, but the results are here. And it was just kind of like, oh, that's cool, man. Wonderful. And so it was like that little bit of like creativity in my mind just kind of died that day.
Yeah. Just like that suppression, we're just going to stifle that. Like,
So totally feel what you're talking about.
That's such a bummer too. And it's not, I'm going to go back to what I was saying before. The system is not designed to allow for that type of thing. It's designed to adhere to the SOPs and say, this is the way that we do things. And, if you really like pressed on somebody, they would probably say something to the effect of like, oh, the people who are signing off on these SOPs are, I guess admirals in the Navy, like, the stars are signing off on this. We don't have the authority to make that change, even if we can see a direct improvement. And that's a problem, in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, I'm like 90% with you. Okay. The other side of this is like the military is designed to be like, we're dealing with the ultimate risk, and that is people dying. Okay. So like the inherent catastrophic risk that you're trying to manage as a leader is putting people in harm's way in such a way that like they're going to die. So like that's the risk you're trying to manage across the organization. And that inherently, I think, then just makes like the entire organization more risk adverse. Now, there's also like tons of layers to this on like how we manage personnel and promote people and identify people for the right types of jobs and everything too. But I think like that overarching thing just puts a damper on taking initiative because of that inherent risk. Whereas like in a business, for example, okay, maybe I make this small investment on this small bet, but I can mitigate it because, it's smaller. I'm only putting in 1% of our budget on this thing, and I'm putting some really good people on this project. But if it does well, then boom, we get like a 10x return for the company. Like I can't quite measure it in the exact same way in the military. And so there's like that dynamic going on that makes the military such a risk adverse organization. And then I think like the other big layer here is like there's zero incentive as a leader to take risk, because it doesn't really do anything for your promotions. If you just kind of follow the steps and follow the method that's laid out in front of you, then like you're going to move up the chain, right? And if you like put your ass on the line for something new or crazy or creative, then there's a greater likelihood that it's not going to work, or it's going to get shot down or whatever, than it is that thing will work. And so we have this system that's just designed to kind of dampen that creativity and all in an effort to mitigate risk.
My background is in finance, and there's this term that I took away from all of my reading and learning of the space, and they call it, and it can be applied anywhere, but they call it career risk. And it applies to, let's say that you have a portfolio manager, somebody who is owning a portfolio of stocks for a mutual fund or an ETF or something like that. And when there is a very real concept to those people called career risk. And it's about what you own in the portfolio. A portfolio manager would never be fired for owning like a blue chip company like IBM. Right. They have no career risk for like, well, IBM's a great company, so it could have happened to anybody. There's no career risk in that. There is career risk in investing in companies that are risky. They're small, they're unproven, they have no track record, all these things. You can get fired for that. And I think that the military is a very similar way. You have a commanding officer on the line for people's lives, literally. And this is much bigger than just money. It's lives. And there's career risk. You're going to get canned if the CO of your unit says, oh yeah, let's go let's go try out all these new shooting techniques. And then something bad happens, you lose somebody of your unit, and they say, well, what was different about this time? Well, we implemented Delaney's training, and we might have shot better, but we lost somebody because of it. Like that, career risk.
Yeah.
You said earlier that you were coming into the Army with like a career focus. And when I look at people's time in the service and they get out at anything more than 4, but less than 20, I instantly am like, okay, this person's got a story. Like they were able to overcome the peer pressure, oh, well, you did 4, you may as well do 20 conversation. Like you overcame that. So there must have been a reason why something switched there.
Part of it was timing in life. And it was, when I got out, I was 30 years old, and I didn't have a wife, didn't have kids. I had a mortgage, but I think someone was renting that house at a time. So like that was kind of covered. There weren't any like significant responsibilities that I had other than to myself. I was really in a place where like all I needed was a couch to sleep on and a suitcase, and like I was good. All right. That was not how I wanted to live, but I was like, realistically, like that's all I need at this point in life. Okay. And what I kind of saw happening was, I was like, okay, if I take this next assignment, then that's going to probably push me to like 12 years or so. This was like the path that I was looking at. I was at this juncture. I was like, okay, I can get out now, or most likely I'm going to go to grad school on the Army's dime, and I'm going to go to probably like some, great college in a fun town somewhere. And let's say I meet someone there, and, she's a very high performing professional, and we get along great. I'm like, hey, let's get married. Wonderful. I'm like, awesome. Do you want to move back to Fayetteville, North Carolina, and basically like put your career on hold while we live in the middle of North Carolina, so I can continue my Army career? And it was probably gonna be like, no, dog, that's not quite what I'm looking for right now. And then I was like, okay, well, then I'm going to go back to North Carolina and then be like a single major working as an XO right now, and I have like no time to do anything else. Oh gosh, that sucks. And I was like, next thing I know, I'm going to be 40 years old and like never started a family. And I was just like, this isn't like the path that I want to go on right now. And
so family was high on the
family was definitely high up there. Okay. That was definitely, I was just like, the timing feels right, where like I can take this risk, and the only person that impacts is me. If, I wait a couple more years and, I have a family, then this decision to get out becomes a lot more challenging, because like I've got a family to support and everything. So I'd rather take this risk now and go do something else. Okay. And then, additionally too, I was feeling that creative urge. Like I want to go do other things. And I felt that the Army was kind of just holding me back from, what else I wanted to go do in life. And then additionally too, I mean, I was looking at my next couple assignments and just wasn't really excited by them. And so it was like, it was kind of the right career time. It was the right time in my personal life. And, it was de-risked enough through, I was getting out of a point where I had the GI Bill, nothing, no family that I, had to be responsible for and everything. I was like, okay, this feels like the right time. Let's just go ahead and pull the plug and make it happen.
It's amazing what you're able to do when your life circumstances are mitigated, and like the risk of that is taken off the table. You're like able to do just unbelievable things that you wouldn't consider otherwise. Like right. I have friends with kids now and stuff, and that's fine. I would love to hear your opinion on kids. That will probably be not for this podcast. That we'll get into that another time, but
love kids. Definitely want them. Yeah. Don't have them yet, but coming soon, probably.
Yeah.
Not like next couple months soon, but like, in the next couple of years.
All right. At some point in the future.
Yeah.
I look at people in that circumstance and I'm like, man, I certainly am not in a place where I could do something crazy. Like if I lost my job tomorrow, I would be in a really, really bad place. I'm not going to lose my job tomorrow, but thinking about that is a whole nother level. And you know that you can perform. And I think that that's something like innate to a man, just like survive, like taking care of your family and that kind of like looking right. out, like you're going to make it work. But it's like, are you ready to make it work if you have to? And like, do you want to do that just yet?
Right.
I think that there's something to be said there for like being able to take risk off the table and like being able to make the decisions that you want to, even if there is some like you can crash and burn, still okay though.
Yeah, absolutely. It was just like when I looked at like my personal risk assessment, I was like, okay, if I stay in, then higher probability of like poor life satisfaction. If I get out, higher probability of, good life satisfaction. There's like the risk of the unknown of like when I decided to get out, honestly didn't really know what I wanted to go do. But I was like, okay, I can mitigate that with time. And there's also like the mitigation, like the risk mitigation of kind of like the burn the ships mentality. Like, okay, if I get out of the military, I got to figure something out here. So like it puts you into that pressure pot of I've got to figure it out.
I always think it's interesting hearing from people that maybe are like putting their thumb on you about staying in the military and kind of appealing to the fact that like somehow staying in the military is going to be harder than getting out, like as if getting out of the service and like giving up this safe paycheck every 2 weeks is not it's not difficult. Like it's tremendously difficult. It's the not safe option. Getting out of the service in general is not safe.
Yeah, I mean, this is totally something I know I've like written about and probably talked about a couple of times. I think one of the challenges in leaving the military is just the safety net that's around you. You get that 2-week paycheck. You have free healthcare, dental, vision, everything. If you want to get when it's tax season, you can go on base and there's a free tax center. You can get them done. If you're having, family problems, there's a family counselor you can go talk to for free. There's healthcare on base. If you need mental health services, you can go talk to someone. It's all like free and provided. And it's just like such this safety net. And it's like, I need XYZ. Cool. You go to this building. Right. And it's gonna be some random numbered building on base, which you're going to struggle to find for like 3 hours anyway. But nonetheless, like it's there. Okay. And then you get out into the wild, the civilian world, and it's like you kind of have to navigate all these decisions yourself. Now, they're not really that hard, but it's like that specter in front of you of like, I have to figure this stuff out and I'm leaving like this safety net can be an impediment to people just making that leap.
One of the things that stood out to me about your background and experience, you got involved with this startup like your last year that you were in the Army. I'm going to butcher the name of this, Moduluk.
Yeah, I think that's how you pronounce it.
Okay. Tell me about that, because it sounded interesting and it seemed like non-coincidental to like the things that you're saying now about being interested in like starting a business, and then also how that has maybe like laid the groundwork a little bit for like what you do for work and life now.
Yeah, so that was actually my Skillbridge internship.
Okay.
So I was stationed in Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and about an hour and a half away is the Raleigh-Durham area, which is a lot of startups, a lot of good businesses, and everything going on there. And there was a guy who was working on a startup, and he found out about the Skillbridge program. It was an organization called Veteran Capital. I think they've now done a rebrand, and I think maybe the guys I originally worked with sold it to someone else. But essentially what Veteran Capital did was place people into startup companies via the Skillbridge program. So my last 3 months in the Army, I was like working in a startup co-working space, growing a beard, wearing jeans, free kombucha and slide in the office kind of thing. Right. And like
living the dream, basically.
It was awesome. It was awesome. And it was a great opportunity because I kind of got to learn a little bit about startups. I got to learn a little bit about just business life and got to kind of like shed out my military identity in a sense. It was an awesome opportunity.
So you joined that, and then you also start the podcast, where I'm sure we're going to talk about that at some point here, but you also start a podcast like I think within your last year of service. What gets you the motivation to do something like that?
Well, so first, actually, I think, when people think of like my brand or something, I kind of like throw up a little bit in my mouth when I call it my brand too, a little bit, but nonetheless, people just think the podcast. So really, actually, I first started, it was a blog, and the blog's still out there, theveteranpro.com. And I was frustrated with the transition process, and I like wanted to try and do something about it. And I was like, okay, I think I made it just like document some of the things that I'm going through. And, as I'm covering, good resources and programs out there, just write about it. So I first started publishing on Medium, which is a good platform to just get started on as a writer. And then after wrote a couple articles, I was like, I think I have enough here to start a blog. And they basically just turned it into a website. And really, I was an English major in undergrad. I like to read and write. I didn't expect I think people joke all the time, like, what do you do with an English degree? I'm like, I communicate all the time. It's super helpful, actually. All right. I
Called
wrote
talking,
yeah, I wrote a shit ton of reports, especially my last job as a civil affairs officer, just a ton of reports that had to go out all the time. And like my writing definitely got better through the Army, surprisingly, just because I was writing so much. And so when I wanted to, first try and do something about this problem, I was like the problem in the military transition, I first started writing about it. And so then, after I kind of built up like a decent enough body of work, I had like 100 articles or something on the site. And then it was April 2020 and it was quarantine. I was living with my sister, my niece and nephew, and my brother-in-law at the time. That's a whole other story of how I got into that place. And I was like bored. Just like wanted something to do. And, I think like a gazillion podcasts were launched during COVID times. And I was like, oh, let's just start a podcast. That seems like a thing to do. And I just kind of started doing it. And then it was fun and I was getting good feedback that people liked it. They were enjoying it. And I felt that I was like pretty good at it. And then I was also finding that I can just like reach out to people who are pretty cool that I want to talk to and say, hey, do you want to talk about yourself for 45 minutes on my show and help out veterans? And like nobody says no to that. Okay. So I was able to start like having really cool conversations with people that I respected and liked. And then eventually, I was able to have cool conversations with people. Like it probably would have been hard for me to get 5 minutes with some of the people I've had on my show, but I've been able to do it just because I'm like, do you want to help out veterans and, give you a platform to talk about, yourself and your business and what you're working on? And again, like nobody says no to that.
There is something about that, the value prop to somebody that's coming on, especially if they have something going on that they are trying to get more awareness to, like the value is there for them too. And even if they don't have something to, push, I guess, I'm not really sure what the other word for that is, but people like talking about themselves. They really do.
And it's like, I interviewed the CEO of Arcturix the other day. Super cool. And so he was a former Army cab officer, and like in his day-to-day life, like he's not involved in, he's not like on a board of veteran nonprofits or anything. And like in his day-to-day life in Arcturix, he's probably not really doing much with veterans or anything, but like it's still part of his identity. And so like when I presented the opportunity to him to come on my show and talk about his career, he was like, yeah, that sounds awesome. Because like this isn't like that's not a part of him that I think he probably gets to think about a lot, but it was like a chance to him to kind of like dig into, like, go back to his Army days and kind of talk about how that's kind of shaped him as a leader in corporate America. And it was like, I think it was fun for him. And then, I got to sit down with the CEO of a pretty cool company for a while, which is also fun for me.
One of the things that I find so interesting about being in the podcasting space, and both of our podcasts like have a ton of overlap and like look to probably very similar types of guests, in the hunt for interesting people approaching with the angle of talking about specifically military, especially for older people, of like maybe CEOs of companies or otherwise. It's a really, really interesting value prop for them because, there's so many like famous leaders of even publicly traded, very, very, very large companies that served in the military at one point. And when you go and read their biography, whoever is writing it, it's like their time in the service is like barely a footnote.
Right.
Recently, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Founders podcast. David Senra does a really, really fantastic job. Basically, he just like reads every bit of information about like the world's greatest entrepreneurs and like does a deep dive on them, and then does this huge podcast like several hours long on the individual. He did one on Sam Walton recently. The fact that Sam Walton was in I believe it was the Army, wasn't even mentioned in this like monstrous, like hours long conversation. It wasn't even talked about. And I was like, man, what a bummer. Like and I know that even after even if you only serve for a short time, that pride is still there. And it makes me interested to like ask some of the like people. One of the people I was thinking of recently, so Sam Walton is obviously no longer with us, but Fred Smith, the former CEO of FedEx, was also served, like just people like that, where that was a part of their lives at one point.
Yeah. And I'm sure when someone like that goes into a podcast, everyone wants to talk to them about business decisions and, what was your last board meeting like? And how do you hire people and think strategically and all this stuff? And there's like a part of them that just wants to talk about, shooting shit with the boys, back in a training camp somewhere, or like that dumb day on the submarine when, I don't know, the nut busted open and water was pouring in and they all had to fix it or something. Like everyone has those memories that like they don't get to access a lot and talk about. And so like there's that kind of part of, being able to kind of go back to their past that I think is attractive to some people.
You talked about having struggled with the transition process, and you have like gone headlong into this space, just like in multiple avenues. You started with the blog, you got the podcast. We're going to get into a couple of like what you're doing today, like work wise, to kind of like fill that gap and solve that problem. What do you think that you've learned about the transition process that you would say maybe isn't obvious?
So I guess the way I think about like my frustrations with the transition process, I put it into three big buckets. Okay. The first is that there is a dizzying array of programs, resources, organizations, institutions out there that like, and I'm putting, for those of you listening right now, like big air quotes, like want to help veterans. Okay. And it's overwhelming. All right. I felt it. Everyone I talk to feels it. There's just like so much shit being thrown at us. All right. And some of those organizations are awesome. They're fantastic. They're phenomenal. Like they really do, create value and like do good things. Then there are some that are maybe, pretty good, or maybe they're like really good for kind of like a niche purpose or something, like they're really good at helping you with interviews. Right. But there's still like all these other stuff you got to think about in your transition. And then frankly, I think there's a lot of organizations out there that like don't really do shit. And it just kind of pissed me off. And I was like, there's just all this like, wrap a yellow ribbon around a tree, hug a vet, support the troops, buy them a beer kind of thing. But there's not a whole like value actually being delivered, I think. And like that was frustrating to me. My second big frustration was that, a lot of people, and this is like a little more niche, but like a lot of people leave the military and are now prime candidates for graduate school. Okay. It's like if you're an officer by definition, like you've got a degree and now you could be thinking of grad school. But I mean, I had plenty of enlisted folks that I worked with who, earned a degree along the way or came into the service with a degree or whatever. My last NCO that I worked with was working on a second master's while we were deployed. And now they're like a prime candidate for grad school. And there's pretty good stuff out there for, being a service member trying to go to undergrad, but not as much great stuff for graduate school. And again, that's just kind of like, I think value left on the table. All right. And then my last big frustration was that I felt the whole system, everything was just designed to just put everybody into a job job, like just check the block, put something in there so we can make sure you have a paycheck when you leave and everyone feels good. And we can turn that block on our Excel sheet from yellow to green and check it off and say, wonderful, Brock got a job. Fantastic. And I was like, that's bullshit. All right. Like we can do better. I know that there's a lot more value and potential in those that serve than like just going to get that job job. And so that was my primary frustration. And then I wanted to make the process easier. And like my thought process and like wanting to make the process easier is I think that there's so many inefficiencies in the system that we just dedicate so much brain space to just trying to navigate it, just to like figure it out or to find like, this helpful resource or somewhere. And I'm like, okay, if we can make this process more streamlined, then you can spend more time figuring out like who you really are and what it is you really want to go do, and less time just trying to like navigate the bureaucracy of it all. And when people can start feeling more comfortable about that process, then I think we can start capturing more value to put out into the United States for, all the veterans that are out there and like the rest of the country that, knows veterans have a strong potential. I just don't think we're doing a good job of, delivering that to the American people.
It's interesting hearing you say this, and I've heard this from several other people as well. People who talk about when they're going to get out or they're starting their transition process and they're being bombarded by resources and whatnot, because it's my experience was the exact opposite. Like I felt like I finished TAPS class and then I just was like a civilian. And then it was like, just like the tumbleweed rolls by and like the crickets are chirping. And I'm like, like, I guess this isn't me anymore. And that was a super weird feeling. Fast forward to today, and now like spending a year talking to vets, now I'm like, kind of almost the exact opposite, where it's like, I almost feel like there's too many, like exactly like what you said. And
Yeah.
that awareness is really important for people in that thing. But then also the awareness is a problem too, because like if there's just a lot of people throwing like money and resources at this weird thing, and the impact is very difficult to measure. And I agree. I think that there are a lot of, I might go out on a limb to say that there are maybe too many VSOs. Like there
Oh,
are,
I will firmly stand on that limb and say there's probably too much out there. Okay. And I think like the problem you just described is of like you personally, when you were going through the system, felt that there, like you weren't getting that at Disney and Array. Okay. And part of that is I also think that like a lot of the system is just like very poorly designed, particularly for junior enlisted when they're getting out. And like it tears me up that like it's just not, it's not as well designed for like the E4, E5 who's getting out after their first deployment, or excuse me, like, first enlistment, and is like 21, 22. There's lots of great programs for officers, junior officers transitioning into careers or whatever, or, a lot of like the services out there are kind of, focused on, there's more like corporate type roles or something that if you're maybe like, a senior NCO or officer you want to go into. But I mean, from like a volume perspective, like the junior enlisted folks are like way more, right? And so I that's absolutely something that I see that's also a flaw in the system. And I just like a little anecdote of kind of how, or a little like example of kind of how I see this in some sense is, all these veteran organizations and like, military transition gurus and influencers and everything, they all live on LinkedIn. All right. And like LinkedIn is a good tool. Don't get me wrong. All right. E4 Joe Snuffy trigger puller is not living on LinkedIn, 9 months before he's getting out of the Marine Corps. All right. That's just like not what they're doing. I wasn't like, but first of all, like nobody's on it. We're really that far out. And so then I go on to, and like all of the data shows that, most people in general, and especially most like, early 20-year-olds, like they're spending their time on TikTok, on Instagram, on Snapchat. Right. And so when you go look at like some of these organizations, like their pages on those social media platforms, there's like zero presence. And I'm like you're not going to where your target market is. Like you're not going to where the biggest need is. And like that's huge frustration I have in this whole thing.
that is, it's interesting that you bring up the divide there between the junior enlisted and maybe officers getting out. I haven't I haven't publicly said this, but I have noticed a very wide disparity in the preparedness of service members getting out and transitioning officer to enlisted. And I've like mentally been wrestling with that. And I just, probably over half of the people I've had on this show are former officers, not enlisted. And a lot of them talk about it as if, kind of, it's some of them, it is lip service, and just like hearing other, like, it's an easier transition. I think it's difficult to describe why that difference is there. And I'm not sure why. I mean, it's a very similar experience. I mean, you manage people, and maybe like you're just a little bit older, you have the degree already. I'm not sure why that is. I appreciate you bringing that up. It's legitimately something I've been thinking about, and I can't quite put my finger on why there is such a disparity there.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's at some level, like we got to call a spade, and there's going to be, look, like someone who's getting out after 4 years as like an O3 or something, who they can be able to put on their resume, like I managed, 40 people or something, like they've got the college degree and everything. And like that does make a difference in the job market. Okay. Like we've got to be like real about that. And at the same time too, but I also think of like, going back to our conversation earlier about, how we manage people and risk inside the military and everything, like, especially like our junior enlisted folks, they're not given like the free reign to like go be creative and like go be proactive in a lot of ways. And so I think like that then presents a lot of like missed opportunities for them to prepare themselves successfully. Right. Like when I went to my battalion commander and said, "Hey, I'm getting out," I pretty much had free reign to like go manage my transition on my own timeline. If you were an E4 getting out in my battalion at the same time, like you probably weren't going to have that. No one was just going to be able to, you weren't just going to get like a blank check to say, "Hey, go spend your time doing what you need to go do to transition from the Army successfully." Right. So like I definitely like had a leg up just because of like the system, being able to prepare myself more than, an E4 or E5 who was getting out at the same time.
Yeah. My wife is experiencing that right now. She's like back on an active carrier, and now is like, routing up paperwork to go to TAPS class because it conflicts with ship's movement. And it's like, I I don't know that an officer would be in the same position. And that just is a little bit of the nature of it. That's like, and I don't mean to sound like disparaging towards officers versus enlisted, just merely trying to highlight that there may be a difference in preparedness getting out, and just opening up the conversation about what we can do about that. Like, hey, if we know
Yeah.
that, how do we better focus on the people who need help?
Yeah. And something I try and get across my podcast all the time. Like I recognize that my audience is probably very heavy on I know it's very heavy on the officer side. And so a lot of times like a message that I'm delivering, I'm saying like, listen, like what I'm talking about in this moment or what I'm about to talk about in the next moment, it may not apply directly to you as, a transitioning 03 or 04 or something like that. But I'm sure right now, you're in charge of an organization, a department, a company, whatever, and you've got some junior folks who are getting out, and like it applies to them. Okay. And like your job as a leader, even if like you're thinking about your own transition, like you also need to think about, the folks who are around you that like, you're still in charge of, and saying, being able to go to someone, not with like that direct, like officer NCO or officer like enlisted relationship, but just say, hey, in 9 months, like I'm going to be like Mark and Barack, right? Like we don't need to like, let's just kind of like, escape that facade for a moment. And I just want to give you some like real world advice. I'm like imagining like myself still being in uniform, like talking to you or something and saying like, hey, I heard this thing on this guy's show and I want to pass it down to you because I think it'd be super useful for you in your transition. It's like, that's something I try and get across my podcast, knowing that I probably have a density of military leaders who are then, looking over subordinates across, the fleet and the force.
I really like that. You mentioned something earlier talking about how like the adoption of like new practices and like new ways of doing things were with the shooting thing. One of the branches that I feel like is particular strong at that is the Marines. Coming from the Navy perspective, like we are like not, it's like the SOP is what we're doing. And I've like referenced this several times, but in like past episodes, but I had Sergeant Major Don Reynolds on the podcast, and we have talked a bunch about, because the way that he talks, I'm like, I just want to understand the Marine Corps better, and like what is in the water, what are they drinking over there that is different than us, because
It's some crazy shit, man. I don't know. Yeah.
the morale in the Navy is shit. Like it is so bad. And then I'm seeing all these Marines on like Instagram and like social that are using social they're using it as a fucking weapon, in a good way though.
Yeah.
They're empowering their junior troops, they're teaching them things, they're passing on information. And there is a little bit of a difference in the nature of the job. One of the things that he described to me that I really enjoy is hearing about is the nature of the Marines' job is more, there's not like a clear book on how to do it. It's very much like it's tactics, it's strategy, it's like evolving with the battlefield. It's all of these things. And like Navy people, we just don't know that. We show up to work, we punch in, we punch out, we go home. Like that's, or, if you're on the ship, you stay out there and you just hang out. That is a different life. And I think that one of the things that the Navy really needs, and I don't know if you experience this in the Army, is we need to adopt that mentality of passing down information, learning from situations, and like empowering the people under us. And I think that you highlighted a great opportunity about, even if maybe your audience is, primarily officers, they need to be talking to them. Pass that down. One of the intros or like outros that I use sometimes on the podcast is, if you learn something from hearing this, don't be greedy. Like share it. Like there are other people that ought to hear it. And that coming from the Navy perspective, that the Navy has a very big opportunity to do better in that way.
I have an old commander who I still like, if he called me up right now and was like, Mark, grab your kit, we're going into the gates of hell, I'd be like, I'm fucking already there, dude. Like that kind of guy. Okay. And he had this great quote that I steal all the time. And it's share ideas selflessly steal ideas selfishly. Okay. And it's basically just like, if you see a good idea, like take it. Okay. And like in that context, often it was like, putting together a plan for an operation or something. He's like, listen, man, like, at some point, like someone's probably planned something similar to this. Like you don't need to recreate the wheel. Go find someone else who's already done it. And that's probably going to be an 85% solution. And also, if you are the person who comes up with the plan for the first time operation, don't keep it to yourself and share it with other people. And if you find, good tidbits of information, like absolutely share it and just like go put it out there. And like that's an ethos like I try and put out all the time of just like when I see someone asking a question, on social media or something, I want to try and respond. Or if I see someone, looking for some type of help, I want to put something out there that provides value to you. And I think it's just like a really good way to, put out good information. And like, this is kind of like my, crazy view of the universe, but just like put out good vibes into the universe and like it'll come back and pay you back in a good way.
I think one of the things that does too is it also tells you a lot about the type of people that you are dealing with. Just speaking to the ethos that commander kind of gave you or whatever, is like anybody that is holding stuff and like withholding information, especially like it's one thing is if it's critical, like if they're purposefully withholding information that like is not a confidentiality issue and like they know that it could make you better and they're like purposefully doing that and you learn about that is not somebody you want to be fucking with, like ever.
Yeah.
Like
yeah.
in the military you can't, like you may not be able to control that, but once you get out, that is not the type of person that you want to be affiliated with. If that's your boss, you need to go find a new job yesterday.
Yeah.
Because the true people, they want to share that. It just speaks something about like kind of your character, really. It's like they know that it's not zero sum. You're not in competition like you think you are all the time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I continuously find like I get a lot of like inbound good stuff to me. And I have to believe in part that's just because like I put good outbound out into the world for people to see. And then people like come to me, bring stuff to me. And I just like happen to recognize, like I have to recognize that like somewhere like that was a flywheel that started because I just kicked it and said, okay, I'm just gonna start putting out stuff for people. And then eventually, good things will come back to me. And I have definitely started to see like that is true.
That's good. It's well-deserved. You've been at the podcast game for a while and putting out really, really good information, and it's very well-deserved. I'm going to kind of like shift gears here a little bit. Otherwise we're going to we could be here all night very well. And
don't threaten me with a good time, man. Yeah.
As long as the whiskey doesn't run out, we could make that happen. You currently work and you're a director at the Military Hiring Accelerator. One of the things that I was kind of teeing up earlier is that you have like really thrust yourself from the active duty space into just this like pure veteran military serving space generally. You got the podcast, you're like, what you're doing for work now completely revolves around serving vets. What do you think that you have learned? Maybe first like start and talk a little bit about what your job is, and then talk about maybe what you've learned about like the job market from being in this space and like going through it yourself and then helping people along through the way.
Yeah. So I'll back up here a little bit and like why I kind of wanted to go down this rabbit hole full tilt. Okay. So again, I just finished up business school a couple months ago. And like most people, when they go get an MBA, their typical thing is then I'm going to go, work for a big consulting firm or go work in an investment bank. Like people think business school teaches you, it's designed to like prepare you to go work in corporate America. Okay. Like that's what it's there to do. All right. And overwhelmingly, like when people leave business school, like that's what they go do. They go work for giant corporations. They go in like very kind of traditional paths. All right. And so I was looking at like where my life was going, like what I wanted to do. And I said, okay, I feel like I'm at this inflection point where I have the opportunity to make a significant impact on something that I care a lot about. And that's the veteran transition piece. All right. I've been doing the podcast and the blog for 2 years. Like I've got a, pretty decent, audience and following. I know a lot about this space. I'm super connected with a ton of people in it. And I see a path to like actually doing something meaningful in the veteran transition process. So I'm like, okay, I could, leave school and go get a consulting job or go work at a big investment bank. But I'm like, that's just kicking the can down the road. And like, I have this point in time where I can try and do something big and meaningful for, a group of people that I give a ton of shits about, and a problem that I care about, and I think that I can actually do something on. Okay. So my current job, so I work for a company called Hiring Accelerator, and we're a veteran recruiting and staffing firm. And basically where that came from. So at first I'll tell a story of how the company was actually created. So my boss and actually my co-founder in Vet Journey, which we'll get to in a little bit. So a guy by the name of Mark Biga, and he's been in the recruiting space for about like 15 years. And then a couple of years ago, he was living in Nashville, and he was really good friends with a guy who had gotten out of Fort Campbell. And this dude was spending like a ton of time, on his own free time, trying to help out other service members through the transition process. Okay. He was doing a Tough Mudder or a Spartan race or something one weekend, and just unexpectedly died of a heart attack. Like super fit dude, and just died. Okay. And so Mark was like at his funeral and was like, I need to do something for this community. And like, he's got he's not a veteran himself, but he's got, a family history of service. And he's like, I want to do something for this community. What do I know? I know the recruiting world. Okay. Let me start a veteran focused recruiting firm. All right. So then as he'd been running that for a couple of years. And the problem he was starting to encounter was, okay, how do I like sort through these people? This guy who's leaving Charleston, South Carolina, who was a Navy nuke, but wants to move back to, Odessa, Texas, and work on an oil rig. It's like really hard to kind of sort through all those data points and like align that person with the right job and be able to, sell their individual, value proposition to a potential employer. Okay. So he's like, I need a technology that can kind of sort through these people and be able to plug and play them into the right role. So that's how we created Vet Journey. Right. And so Vet Journey is a tool you can use to help guide you through your military transition and plan what you're going to do afterwards. All right. And we'll dig into like the specifics on it, I guess. But when it all comes down to it, I was like, I don't want to go the normal path. I see an opportunity to do something meaningful and impactful about something that I care a lot about. And I want to jump on that opportunity. And again, when we going back to like this idea of like risk, right? This definitely was a riskier option. Like I could have taken like the normal corporate job and had a lot like safer route. But I was like, okay, the downside risk of, me falling flat on my face here is mitigated by the fact that, I just got a degree from a great institution, and like, I can definitely like rely on that. And if need be, I can step back into like, that more kind of traditional route. But if I had the chance to swing for the fences right now, I'm going to take a big swing and try and do it.
We were talking about that a little bit earlier, but I think that that's going to be one of the key takeaways from this conversation is, and something that like I personally adopt not only in like my kind of personal financial life, but career wise as well, as like de-risk yourself and just swing like really, really big. And like, you can sit there and swing all day when you've got no, like you said, you've got an MBA, you've got this great backdrop to fall down on. And, you're going to walk into, let's say you do 2 or 3 of these things and nothing works out. You're going to walk into a job interview at corporate America, maybe not happy to be there, but your shoulders are going to be wide. Your head isn't going to be held down because of that. And you're going to be able to talk confidently about, hey, yeah, I've got this backstory. Well, what happened the last couple of years? Well, let me tell you, this is what I went and did. This is what I learned. And that's going to be so valuable. And I think people a lot of times get scared about like having failures on their resume, especially when it comes to like new companies or whatever. Like, man, any decent employer is not going to look down on that at all.
Yeah. And actually the way that I looked at failure, I had this thought maybe, I don't know, 2-3 months ago. And I was just having this moment of trepidation personally of like, oh my God, like, do I want to continue trying to like go down this entrepreneurial path? Like, what am I doing? And then I was like, you know what, Mark, if you're going to fail, like fucking fail, man, like fail big, give it a shot, like leave it all on the table. Like, just do it and say, you know what? I tried, and like, I fucking tried and it didn't work. And I'd rather like say that than say, well, I half-assed it and it didn't quite work out. And like, what a coulda, shoulda. I'd rather like go big. And if it does work, like all of my dreams are going to come true. And if it doesn't work, then fuck it. I'll figure something else out.
One of the things I really admire about you and what you're doing with Vet Journey is, as I've come to, this is kind of a result of the over the last year, like doing this podcast and like getting more immersed in the post-service veteran active space. I'm not sure what the right word for that is, but people who are actively having these conversations. A lot of the people who care about transition, one of the things that I've seen is it kind of ends up becoming like working at a talent management thing or something else. It's primarily a lot of like, hey, how can we help get other vets into different jobs? And they know it's a problem, but it almost has kind of seen like optically as that is the one path that it leads to. There's nothing wrong with that. And there are a lot of like people, I've had tons of people on this show that are like individual like coaches, consultants that like kind of walk people through this process. There's absolutely a huge need for that. One of the things that I thought was interesting about Vet Journey is like it's kind of creating something that wasn't there before. So do you want to talk about what Vet Journey is, just kind of like as a raw concept? Who is it for? What the offering is? And then we can kind of take it from there.
Yeah, so it is a web-based online platform that you can use to plan your transition from the military. Okay. And there are a few things that we've tried to like bake into this that are foundational to what we do with Vet Journey. All right. The first is we think holistically about the veteran transition challenge. All right. There are, a number of competitors out there or, other companies, other organizations. And I think a lot of them focus on like what I say is really just like the last 3 months worth of problems. How do I get my resume ready? How do I, network and, prepare for an interview and everything? Like that's all important stuff too. And like, we've got, stuff built into Vet Journey to help you with that. But additionally, I know put together your personal financial plan is important. I know, sometimes just like the simple question of what are like the first form that I need to actually submit to somewhere to actually start the process to get out of the military. That alone is a question I've gotten a lot of times actually. And so like, I want to just make the process easier for people. Okay. And it kind of goes back to this idea of if we can streamline this process, if we can put it online, if we can make it easy for you to use on your phone, whether you're on a ship, you're in, Qatar, you're in the Philippines, you're, on staff duty somewhere and you can't go to a TAP class. Like I want you to be able to have the ability to start thinking and planning about, your future life and start doing something meaningful on it in an easier way. Okay. And I also want people to go through and not feel overwhelmed by the system and say, okay, there's this tool that I can use that keeps me on task, on track. And if I have a question about, what my next step is, I can go here and try and figure it out. So like that's like the like big vision of what I want. All right. The other part, I talked about the holistic approach to Vet Journey. The other big thing here is to focus on data. All right. I look at the current system and it's a lot of analog things, right? Like we were literally just talking about this in our team meeting the other day. And I was like, people still go to the office, they still go to like transition office and have to fill out paperwork to then like, move along the process. I'm like, this is the fucking 21st century. Okay. I can pull out my phone and order a fucking jet if I want to. And I have to like fill out this paperwork to come on, like we can move beyond this. Right. And so there's a lot of interesting things we can start thinking about when everything's digital and we can focus on the data. All right. So one, like I can track, this is all kind of like Mark's big vision things, like what I want to do with Vet Journey, right? But I could track Brock going through our system and identify, okay, this was your unique background. Let me come up with like a custom plan for you, not like a generalized plan for everybody else, but like a custom plan for you. So you have, the most personalized plans transition from the military. Okay. Then I can also start seeing, okay, other people like you, with your similar background, your skills from the military, maybe they went and go do these other similar things outside of the military. And so maybe we can start like giving you information about like, hey, here's what certain career fields look like. Here's how you get started doing XYZ. The current system misses all this stuff because it's generalized and it's analog. But when you start putting it digitally, you can start making those recommendations to people. You start giving them, nudges. You can start making, more focused plans. So they have a personalized exit strategy for the military. Okay. And then I think we even start getting into like really interesting things when we start talking about like negative outcomes after the military. All right. I've had a number of friends take their life, and probably only one or two of them I can think of right now were in the uniform. Overwhelmingly, they were post-military, and most of those were within the first 2 years of service. Okay. And I can't help but wonder if there weren't some places we could have caught them upstream and seen some behavior of, how they were preparing for post-military life, and be able to interject with the right piece of information. And I don't want to be so, naive to think that just giving someone a blog post at the right time is going to make them, prevent them from taking their own life, 18 months down the road. But there's also a part of me that thinks, given the right information at the right time can alter, the trajectory of how you're thinking about life. And maybe we do avoid a couple of circumstances like that. And so I see an opportunity in doing things focused on data and focused on the digital platform that we can do that we can't do with the current analog system. And so that's my big vision, big head idea about what I want to do with that journey.
How do you think about tackling some of the nuances of the different branches? You're talking about how you want to kind of provide a custom tailored experience, maybe based on background, MOS, NEC, and then maybe take into factor what the goals are post transition. Is it going to a job? Is it going to school or whatever? Are you thinking about, you and your team thinking about individually, you guys yourselves doing that? Is that something that's machine based? Because I know that there's there's differences in the form numbers from the Navy to the Army. There's just even small nuances like that.
Absolutely. Okay. So we absolutely want to be able to tailor, your transition timeline and your planning process based on, if you're Navy, Army, Marines, whatever your branch was, and then also whatever your MOS was too. And one of the exciting things that I think we can do with that journey is what I call get beyond the MOS description. Okay. So for example, if you go into Google and type in your MOS or your rating or your AFSC, whatever it is, Google is then going to crap out, a list of jobs, and all those jobs are related to keywords from your MOS description. Okay. Or your rating description. Okay. There's a blurb somewhere that was written by someone in the military that describes, what a 11 Alpha, that was my first job in the Army, what 11 Alpha does. Okay. So then basically what Google is doing is it's scraping those keywords and aligning those with keywords and job descriptions that are out there in the world. Okay. That's pretty good, but that's probably a 30% solution. All right. Now, when I think about what I did, my MOS description captures maybe 20-30% of what my actual job was. And there's a lot of missed opportunities in what I could potentially do outside of the military for my skill sets that I gained. But we miss all that because we're reliant on these small systems. All right. So what we can start doing in Vet Journey is start learning about you as an individual and trying to understand what you did, within your MOS, your within your rating, but also we can start asking you questions about okay, what were the other duties and responsibilities? What were some, what were the deployments you went on? What were the other agencies you worked with? What are the languages you speak? And then with all that information, now we can start giving you a really tailored approach to, what your transition looks like. A couple of weeks ago, I was talking with the head of talent acquisition for Truist. It's a huge bank. Okay. Massive bank. And I described to her what my job did in the military as a civil affairs officer. And she's like, oh, you'd be a great fit for partnerships, because a lot of my job was working with, foreign partners, nonprofits, foreign governments, State Department, whoever else. It's a lot of people outside of the military. She's like, you'd be perfect for partnerships. I'm like, yeah, right, exactly. But when you put my job into, a Google MOS translator, all it tells you is that I should be a emergency management professional or a humanitarian relief delivery coordinator or something like that. And you miss all this extra stuff because it's not just captured in this one paragraph. And the way to try and solve that and get around it is by having an individual move through, the Vet Journey system. We can start learning about you as an individual and start changing the data that we're pulling from to provide you tailored recommendations.
I think you hit on a couple key points that I think are really important to unpack. One, that you're not your MOS. A lot of times there's much more to your job, your personality, your skills, your ability than just what your a few letters and a number say. The second thing is that you describe Vet Journey as this personalized 12-month separation timeline. And I think the value there's a lot of value there to be had, but one of the big kickers is that you start this conversation early. Like this is
Yeah.
not like, hey, I'm getting out in 6 months, I need to take TAP and then, hopefully like figure something out from there. It's like, no, we're starting this at least a year out. Like, and it honestly probably could be earlier. Your preparation for getting out should be starting when you join almost, or at least having the thought process. But certainly at the 12-month mark, you want to be very active about the LinkedIn profile, like, all of those things, like starting to have those conversations at least, because it takes time. It's not something that you're just going to like get out and roll right into a job.
100%. Like my what I envision is like the first kind of users we're trying to get on the vet journey. It's not someone who's like in the transition assistance program, like the mandatory training. It's the person who probably hasn't even told their chain of command that they're getting out of the military yet. They are maybe 18 months away from transition, but like, they and their family have talked and they say, you know what, I think that I'm starting to get ready for this thing. And I think this is the right move for us, for me and for us as a family, for me to transition from the military. I can't quite like put it on the radar yet. I can't quite, start doing the official steps that I'm going to have to eventually do. But nonetheless, like I want to start thinking about this and start being proactive. Okay, cool. Vet Journey is a tool I can go to start putting the pieces of the puzzle together for myself, so that, when the giant system of the military transition process starts getting thrust at me, I'm a little more prepared for it. And, when I go to my mandatory transition assistance classes, I'm not just receiving this information for the first time. Right. And I'm not just receiving it for the first time, but maybe I also know how to counter some of the bad information that's out there as well. So like we view it as complementary to, the existing, DoD program, but very much I want something that, you can start using when, even if you're like in the curiosity phase of like what post-military life looks like, and I want to start thinking about what that is, like that's the person that I envision like going into the Vet Journey platform.
Well, it also gives the service member an opportunity to start taking transition into their own hands on their timeline. It's not, you can be starting down this process regardless of whether, like you pointed out, maybe it's not the right time to bring it up to your command yet, because there's like kind of all of the feelings, maybe not, I don't know, I'm not going to speak to the officer side, but on the enlisted side, like you were in danger when you bring that conversation up
100%.
of like, you're instantly like, welcome, you're going to get like an average eval. You might get sent TDY somewhere else just because, oh, they're getting out, so fuck them.
Yeah.
Like it's almost it's a career killing move to say that. And God forbid that you don't actually end up getting out, or it's not the right time. Like you have set yourself back meaningfully. This is a great opportunity to take that transition into your own hands earlier and at kind of a pace that suits you better.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, I want to be very clear for everyone listening right now. Like I've talked about a lot of like, big crazy ideas and like what I want to do with this thing. And, if you log on to vetjourney.com right now, like you're not going to see all this full functionality. Okay. But we are building it, and like we want to build it. And a lot of like the, what you'll see on like the user side, like the front end side, isn't as much quite there yet. But a lot of like our back end architecture is already built to enable us to do this. So I just want to put like that disclaimer out there in case someone logs on a Vet Journey and is like using this right now and like, what the fuck is this guy talking about? This thing doesn't do all this shit yet. We're working on it. Okay. Yeah.
We're looking for those early adopters, those ones that don't need that fancy UI interface yet.
Well, I mean, one of the things that's like even annoying, like disgusting to me almost, is like I'll fully admit that like where we are right now with Vet Journey is not where I want to be, eventually. Okay. Like we're still in building mode on this thing. But even like our early users are hopping on this thing. Like I'm getting responses from them saying like, man, this is incredible. This is already good. Like this is better than anything else that I've interacted with. And I think it's more a testament to just like how poorly served like this market is, that like what I am not even like totally happy with yet is still better than like a lot of stuff that's already out there. And this is, 1% of eventually where I want this thing to be.
Low threshold to beat. That's a good place to be in.
Yeah.
One of the things that I have enjoyed, I got on your stakeholders email list, and you're being very public about where you guys are at in the process and actively pulling the kind of community together to form around this thing, or quote, building in public, whatever you want to call it. Will you talk a little bit about what you see the business model of this looking like? Is this going to be a venture idea that you're going to raise money for? Are you going to totally self-fund it? Talk about maybe how you plan to make money, where that kind of falls into place with this.
Yeah, sure. So full disclosure right now, like we are a for-profit company. Okay. And so right now we're actually at an interesting place where there's potentially two different paths we could go down. Okay. The first would be, we remain like a totally private company. Well, either way, we'd still be a private company. We become a software for the private sector. Okay. There's also the potential this could potentially be adopted by the Department of Defense to use for the transition program. Okay. So then essentially we would be like a contractor for the US government to provide software for the transition assistance program. Okay. There's still like that potential lingering out in the air. I don't want to put too much stake in that quite yet, but we're early enough where those two options are still possible for us. Okay. So with the latter option, we would become a contractor for the United States government and basically be like a software provider for this, the military transition process. All right. If that option doesn't present itself as a viable possibility, then we go down the monetization route. And so essentially what this then becomes is a talent pipeline for companies that want onboard veteran talent. All right. And there's a couple of different, sectors this can go into. One, there's definitely a possibility of, let's say I'm a company and I know about the Skillbridge program, for example. I can find service members who are 6 months out. I can bring them into my company. They can work for me for free. And I get a chance to kind of, like, the way I describe it is test drive before you buy. It kind of going back to this idea of risk. What I love about the Skillbridge program is, like, for a company that's trying to hire veterans, it's a great way to de-risk a hire, because I can bring them on and the military is still paying them, paying benefits and everything. I get a chance to train and onboard them into my company. And if that was a regular employee, then I'm doing that and they're probably not providing me value for those first couple of months. Nonetheless, like, I'm paying like their salary and benefits and everything and insurance and all that stuff. Whereas with Skillbridge, you can take a lot of that away. So companies can see this and say, okay, great. If people are logging onto this thing, 12 plus months out, this is a fantastic way for us to find the Skillbridge folks. All right. There's also definitely the possibility, and we've got some great feedback from like defense contractors, and in particular for like very technical or like highly cleared, skilled talent. Let's say, like, if you're a software developer with a TS SCI, oh man, like everyone and their mother is going to be drooling over trying to hire you. Right. And like, you're going to be very competitive on the market. And so, like, the big defense contractors, like, they're willing to pay access to find you further upstream and not wait until those last couple of months. But if they can identify you 12 months out, that's fantastic for them. And the other part about the contracting world is, so if I'm a government contractor, for example, and I'm trying to put a proposal together for a government project, and I know I'm going to need to fill it with people, maybe I know that the veteran population is a great place for me to go for those people. Veteranity then provides you a forecasting tool where I can see how many people are leaving the military, what are their skill sets, what are their backgrounds. Oh, great. I can then try and like hire these people, put them in my company, and then fill this contract. And that kind of changes the game for them from like a forecasting and analytics perspective. So there's a couple of the different ways. And then there's some fun stuff we can do with like referral programs, for example. So let's say, just earlier today, I was talking with a guy who is a franchise broker. All right. And so he makes his money when he finds you sign on for a franchise, and then that franchise pays him for the brokerage. All right. Veterans are a great fit for franchise opportunities. Franchises love veterans because we're used to, working within, you talked about earlier, being in the Navy, like the checklist and the standard operating procedures and everything. Like, veterans are very good at operating inside those. But also, like, to be an effective franchisee, you've still got to have like some entrepreneurial mindset, the ability to kind of figure shit out, to walk in from day one and be able to lead folks. And so all those factors coalesce to making veterans great fit for franchises. So for an example, something we could do with Vet Journey is start trying to, identify people 12 months out. They say, yeah, I think I might want to, run a franchise when I get out of the military. Okay. We can start giving them information, start educating them about what franchise opportunities look like. And then when they exit, we connect them with a broker, they make a deal happen. And so like we'll collect a referral fee or something like that. That's kind of how it would work.
I'm going to need to be sure to put a link to your Twitter thread about why Skillbridge is such a powerful program in the show notes. You did a really great thread on that. I have talked about it on the show before about why Skillbridge is powerful for people in the service, but it's also a very powerful tool for employers who are looking to kind of hire, very qualified, highly skilled talent. So I will be sure to put a link to that in the show notes.
I'll say just a couple quick notes on Skillbridge. So one, from a company's perspective, there are some downsides to it. Okay, one is the location piece. For example, like I was working in Fort Bragg, and I did my Skillbridge in Durham, North Carolina. What I ended up doing was I rented like a very small room somewhere during the week, and I commuted to Durham. Like I would drive up there Monday morning, go work Monday through Friday, and then drive back Friday night, back to my place in Fort Bragg. And like I paid for that out of pocket. And like that kind of sucks. So like that location matchup can be a challenge. There's also, at the end of the day, like you got to get your commander to sign off on this program. So you can have a great candidate who's a great fit for a role somewhere, but their boss is maybe just an asshole and is like, nah, dude, I don't want to sign off on this, and doesn't let them out. That sucks too. But on the other hand, if you can kind of, get past some of that stuff, if you can like match the location, or if it's a remote opportunity, and then, you can get the commander's buy off, it's a fantastic opportunity for companies to find people. I think in particular, and talking to a number of organizations, sometimes they're looking for people they're like generalists. They're like jack of all trades, kind of like, we don't have like a very, very specific skill set for you, but like we need this person in like this part of our company who can just like they're just like our get shit done person. Right. And like veterans are a great fit for that. Okay. So, I mean, when I was working at Modulic for my Skillbridge internship, we had this angel investor come in, and there's me and another Skillbridge intern in there. Funny enough, who's also named Mark, who was also in civil affairs. How we both ended up there is weird enough. But when this guy found out that we had 2 veterans in the company, he was like, I tell every company I work with, to every startup that I like invest in, to go find veterans, because they just get shit done. And a lot of times with like Skillbridge, like someone's just looking for like a get shit done person, and vets are a great fit for that.
It's been so cool to hear. At the beginning, we were talking about origin stories, and you were talking about this kind of like entrepreneurial bug, and it's so cool to like hear you living that out right now. What do you think has been the biggest challenge that you have faced and have like overcome already, or are like currently battling right now with building Vet Journey?
I think the toughest thing is just it's the unknown. We don't know exactly what the future looks like. Things that we thought might be an avenue for us to, make a business out of this, we then have had other opportunities come to us that are also potential, ways we can turn this into like a revenue driving business. Yeah. The biggest challenge is the unknown. You just don't know what the future looks like. And that's hard from a building perspective. And it's also hard from just a personal perspective of like what is my personal future going to look like? And like, how much longer, like what is my personal cutoff where I say, you know what, Mark, you gave it a good shot, but you failed, and go try something else. Right. That's the biggest challenge, is just that sense of the unknown. But I think that's why I'm of the opinion that vets make great entrepreneurs, because we're very comfortable with the unknown. I was kind of thinking about this lately. The basic idea of what so many of us go do as part of our job on the service end of defending the country, okay, is just like venture out into the unknown and just look for shit to happen, right? If you're on a sub and you're going out to the South China, I don't even know if we have subs in the South China Sea. I'm sure we probably do. Like, going out to the South China Sea, like, you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what's going to happen. Like, there may be a Chinese carrier that pings a radar and hits you or something, or you get a flash message that says like, prep the tubes, nuclear launch going to happen. Like, you don't fucking know what's going to happen. And like, going on a patrol in Afghanistan, like you're walking out the door and you're like, I'm just going to go walk into this valley of death because I need some shit to happen and just make it happen. And like, that is like the ultimate unknown to encounter as a human being, is like the unknown of violence and death. Yeah, like if you can deal with like that idea, from your military service, whether it be, flying a plane or, driving on a carrier or, running a patrol somewhere, dude, the fucking unknown of a business, like it's nothing, dude.
I agree with your earlier statement about vets making great entrepreneurs. And I think that there are a ton of parallels between the uncertainty of that and the desire to do something meaningful. And a lot of people set out to start their own business because they want change. They want to serve their higher calling, serve their purpose, whatever that may be.
I was a couple of weeks ago, I was at the AUSA conference. So it's the Association of the United States Army. It's like this big, they're like a lobbying, like defense industry organization. Okay. So like 30,000 people come to this thing. Like all the major defense contractors are there trying to sell stuff into the Army. But then there's also like, panels with generals talking about policy and everything. It's this mega event for the Army. Okay. And I happened to run into my my old battalion sergeant major, and he had been my battalion CSM in Iraq, like 2015. I hadn't seen this guy in like since then. Okay. So that was like an 05 level command, and he's now command sergeant major at a 3-star level command. All right. And we like just happened to bump into each other. He was like, "Oh shit, it's Lieutenant Delaney." And I was like, "Oh shit, it's Army. What's up, man?" And we started talking and riffing, and he was like, he was going to ask me about like what I've been up to after the military and everything. And this is a guy who's been in for like 37 years. All right. Like awards for valor, Purple Hearts, all the stuff. Right. And I remember him saying to me, he was like, like, what have you, he's like, have you enjoyed it? Like, are you like, do you miss the Army? I'm like, I don't. The Army was great. It was awesome. But I like found a way to serve afterwards. And he's like, yeah, man, like I tell people that all the time. It's a great way to serve in uniform, but there's absolutely a way to serve after the uniform. The US military does not have a monopoly on service to the nation. Okay. We kind of do it in the most apparent visual way. And on like the far end of the spectrum of like, being ready to make the ultimate sacrifice and everything, like the highest level way, I would say. But that's definitely not the only way to serve your country. And so like, there's absolutely ways to find a way to do it post-military life.
What do you think that we can learn from your life and experience that we can implement today?
Ooh, that's a heavy question, man. The biggest thing I would want, this audience to think about is 2 things, risk and fear. The aspect of risk and like taking a view of your life of, okay, there's like this dream that I want to go after. There's this thing that I want to do. There's this thing that I want to accomplish. What are the steps I can take to go after that? What are the risks that are there to make me do that? And how can I mitigate them? So for me, it was like, I wanted to start a company and change the military transition. The downside risks were that I fell on my face when the business failed and it was never there. Okay. I can mitigate that by the fact that, one, that creates a great story for me that I can then probably leverage into something else. I just got a great business degree that I can use for something else. Like, okay, that downside risk for me personally is mitigated. So let's go forth and conquer and try and go after it. And I think like when I kind of wrap that into this idea of like, what would you do if you like weren't afraid of failing? Like, what would you do if you weren't afraid of like trying to go after it? Like, just go do it. Like, we all just like want to get our own ways so many times. I want to be very, very clear with everyone listening. Like, I get in my own way every fucking day. All right. I absolutely, like, you're sitting here listening, like, oh, Mark's got it all figured out. I absolutely do not. All right. I get in my own way every day. I probably have done it on this podcast at some point, but I try and just like get over the fear of myself doing that and figure out and think like, what can I do? What's my way I can just swing for the fences and just try and make something happen? And like, whatever it is for you, like think bigger and then think bigger again, and then go do that.
It's funny starting down the path of starting to kind of think bigger, like you said, a little ways down that, it's very easy to realize that you didn't think big enough. And each step you get further and further and realize that you're like, oh man, I should have been thinking way bigger. And I would imagine comes a point, I know that I'm certainly not there, but there probably is a point where you realize that there's maybe nothing that's too big. And I hope that you, me, and the rest of any service members can get to that point as well.
I'll tell just like a brief story that happened to me personally today. Okay. So I got a phone call today from the office of a congressman. FYI, that's not like a normal Friday for me. Okay. I'm not like getting called by Congress people on a normal basis. That's or ever for that matter. That's not a thing. Okay. Why did I get called by a congressman? Because like 3 weeks ago, I went on to my congressional representative's website and I submitted a query saying that I wanted to talk to them about vet journey and changing the veteran transition. And guess what? Like they bought off on it and they reached out to me and said, hey, let's set up a meeting. I want to talk with you. And that was just because I was like, fuck it. Let's dream big and let's swing for the fences. And like the worst thing that's going to happen here is that they just don't answer this message that I inputted into this like generic form on their website. That's literally it. But then I did it and now they reached out to me and like, I'm going to be able to present this idea to someone and I don't know if anything's going to come from it, but fuck it. I'm happy I tried.
And coming back to that idea of like removing your downside risk and start swinging.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have one final question for you, and this will be a much lighter question, I promise. You said earlier, being an English major, you're an avid reader and writer. What are you reading right now? And what is the best thing that you've read?
Oh, great question. Okay. Give me 1 second, actually, because I have my book stand literally right behind me. So I'm going to grab them real quick for those of you on video. Okay. Okay. So I'm usually reading 2 books at the same time. So I'm usually reading a nonfiction book and a fiction book. I see lots of people out there in like the personal development world and everything who say like, oh, I never read fiction. Like that's not alpha enough. And like, I'm not going to learn from that and everything. And I think that's complete and total bullshit. I've learned some amazing things about life and being a person from fiction.
You're not just reading stoicism like 24 hours a day so that you basically aren't shit.
I wake up at 5 a.m. every day. I run 10 miles. I drink a gallon of water before 6 a.m. and then journal for 3 hours and then visualize my goal for the next day before I then go work a 12-hour day. You don't do that every day?
This is how you win.
This is how you win. Okay. Anyway, sorry. So for my nonfiction book, and I'm holding it up for those of you who are watching on video. So I'm not a huge Tom Clancy fan, and I don't usually read books like this, but I've been reading The Sum of All Fears, which is a super fun movie. And it's actually been a really good book. There's been some Tom Clancy books that I've basically just wanted to like beat my head against. They've been so terrible. But I really am liking this one. And then for my nonfiction book, I'm reading The Dark Side of Camelot, which is basically about the other less presentable side of JFK that most of us kind of don't know about or have heard like very, small rumors about, like his family kind of, getting their start in bootlegging, how he was like a total womanizer and everything. It's about the side of JFK you didn't know about. And then a book I have just got that I haven't read yet. It's called Taming Your Gremlin. And it's just about basically removing barriers, getting past fear, and getting over yourself a little bit. So I haven't started that one yet, but I'm excited to read it. And it's pretty short too. I think it's even got pictures. So for those of you Marines listening, you can even enjoy it.
I have not heard of any of those books, so I'll need to put those on the list. Mark, this has been a super, super fun conversation. I appreciate you joining me today. Where can people go to find you, connect with you, listen to your podcasts? Just plug it all.
Sure. We're going to do the whole thing. All right. So I'm most active on Instagram. Okay. So it's at The Veteran Professional. It's definitely where I'm really most active. You can find my blog at, theveteranpro.com. The podcast is The Veteran Semi-Professional. And I'll do a quick little explanation of why I put the semi in there. So I created the Veteran Professional website first. And then when I started the podcast, I wanted to kind of open up the conversation to not just talk about, like professional careers in air quotes there, but I also wanted to explore topics like mental health, using psychedelics for, PTSD and depression. And I wanted to like open up and talk about more kind of like the soft stuff and not just like, how do I be a hard charger alpha type performer? You can follow me personally on @Mark B. Delaney on Twitter. If you want to reach out to me, mark@theveteranpro.com, and then totally just look me up on LinkedIn and we can chat there if you want.
Awesome. Mark, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, for sure, man. This is a ton of fun. I had a blast.
Thanks so much for tuning in today. Your listenership helps me better educate people like you and the rest of our nation's military, both past and present, on building a successful life outside of military service. If you're looking for more ways the top vets are leading more effective lifestyles, building businesses, and using the resources designed specifically for you, press here for a selection of some of the best clips. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel to stay up to date, and I will be talking with you soon.